It started with a phone call I almost didn't answer. A number I didn't recognize. No voicemail. No message. Just a vibration on the kitchen counter beside my half-empty glass of bourbon. It was late, that in-between hour when the world's gone quiet, but your thoughts haven't caught up yet. Outside, Austin rain whispered against the window. My wife used to love that sound, said it made her feel safe, like the world was rinsing itself clean. Now it just made the house feel emptier. The phone buzzed again. I sighed and picked it up. Yeah? A woman's voice, bright and too polite. Mr. Callahan? This is Olivia from Bayview Jewelers. I just wanted to confirm that your daughter picked up the vintage sapphire necklace this afternoon. She mentioned it was a family piece, so we didn't need to appraise it before resale. My fingers froze on the countertop. I'm sorry, what did you say? She repeated herself. Slowly this time. The words hit me like ice water. That necklace. It wasn't just jewelry. It was my late wife's, the one I gave her on our 10th anniversary. She wore it to every important moment of our lives: graduations, holidays, hospital rooms, funerals. She once told me, "When I'm gone, I wanted to remind you that love doesn't disappear. It just changes form." After she died, I kept it locked in the mahogany box in my study. I couldn't look at it often, too many ghosts in that shimmer, but knowing it was there felt like keeping her close. Like she hadn't completely left. Now some stranger was telling me my daughter, Emily, sold it for cash. For a vacation. The bourbon burned down my throat like betrayal itself. I hung up without saying another word. For a long while, I just stood there, listening to the rain and the ticking of the old clock she'd picked out. Each tick felt heavier, louder. The kind of silence that presses on your ribs until you can't breathe. Emily was my only child. 24 years old. Smart, stubborn, with her mother's eyes and my temper. Since her mom passed, I tried to give her space, maybe too much. She'd grown distant over the years, always chasing something, new friends, new places, new distractions. But I never thought she'd cross this line. I walked to the study and opened the drawer. Empty. The imprint of the necklace box still visible in the velvet lining. Gone. That's when something inside me shifted. Not anger, not even heartbreak, something quieter, colder. Like the air before a thunderstorm. I remembered the last time she'd visited. She'd hugged me fast, distracted, eyes on her phone. "Dad, you really should get up more," she'd said, laughing. "You're always holed up here with your memories." I'd smiled and said, "Some memories are worth the company." She didn't understand. Maybe she couldn't. Now I realized, maybe she never really knew what that necklace meant. Not just to me, but to the woman who'd given her life. I poured another drink and sat in my wife's old armchair. The house smelled faintly of her lavender soap. Or maybe my mind was playing tricks again. I thought about the years, the late nights, the fights I avoided, the words I never said. How easy it is for love to rot into misunderstanding when you stop tending to it. On the wall hung a photo of the three of us, a family frozen in time. Emily was 10 then, smiling with a gap in her teeth, her mother's hand resting gently on her shoulder. My own hand on the other. We looked unbreakable. I stared at that photo for a long while. Then I whispered, "You know what to do, Laura." But she wasn't here. Just me. The rain. And a truth I couldn't unhear. Some people think betrayal is loud, shouting, breaking, slamming doors. But the worst kind slips in quiet, like that call. By midnight the bourbon was gone. My reflection in the window looked older than I remembered. Tired. Hollow. I didn't know it yet, but that night would end more than one life as it used to be. Something broke. And something else, something I buried for years, woke up. She showed up the next morning. No warning. Just the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway and the doorbell slicing through the quiet. I hadn't slept. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of it, heavy and metallic. I stood at the window and watched her step out of her white Tesla, phone in hand, coffee in the other. She looked like she belonged in another life, one with soft edges and warm lighting, not here, not in the house that still smelled faintly of her mother's perfume. When I opened the door, she smiled the way people smile when they know they've done something wrong but hope charm will fix it. "Morning, Dad. You're up early." "I didn't sleep," I said flatly. Her expression flickered, but she walked in like she owned the place, heels clicking across the hardwood. "You really should change this carpet. It's so dated." I said nothing. Just watched her set her coffee on the counter, on Laura's favorite coaster. The one with the blue hydrangeas. "How was your trip?" I asked finally. My voice came out calm. Too calm. She froze. "Trip? The one you sold your mother's necklace to pay for?" Color drained from her face. For a moment she looked like the little girl who once came running to me with scraped knees. Then she blinked, straightened, and tried to recover. "Oh, for God's sake, Dad! It wasn't like that." I leaned against the counter, arms folded. "Then tell me what it was like." She sighed, frustration creeping into her tone. "I needed money, okay? For the trip to Bali. I've been working nonstop, I was exhausted, and I thought you wouldn't even notice. You never wear that necklace." "I don't wear it," I said quietly, "because it isn't mine to wear." Her eyes darted away. "You keep everything locked up in that study like a museum. Mom wouldn't have wanted that. She'd want you to move on." I almost laughed, but it came out as something closer to pain. "Emily, you don't get to use your mother's memory to justify a betrayal." She flinched. "It's not betrayal. It's a necklace, Dad. A piece of metal and stone. You make it sound like I sold her soul." I looked at her for a long time. "Maybe you did." For a moment, the house fell silent. Even the clock seemed to hesitate. She shifted uncomfortably, picking at her nails, eyes glistening with irritation. "You always do this," she said. "Turn everything into a morality lesson. Maybe you should have tried being less perfect when she was alive." There it was, the hidden blade behind her tone. Guilt thrown like a weapon. I turned away, gripping the counter so hard my knuckles went white. "You think I don't already replay every mistake? Every night I spent at work when I should have been here? Every time I told myself there'd be another weekend, another trip, another day?" She softened for a moment, then hardened again. "I didn't mean it like that." "Yes, you did," I said quietly. "We stood in that kitchen, a foot apart, oceans away." Finally, she sighed and reached for her purse. "I'll pay you back." I looked at her, my daughter, my wife's reflection, standing there offering money for something priceless. "You can't buy back what you don't understand." Her voice trembled with irritation. "You're making this a bigger deal than it is." "Then maybe that's why it's such a big deal." She rolled her eyes. "You just want something to be angry about." "No," I said, my voice lowering. "I want something to still mean something." Her shoulders slumped. For a moment I saw the little girl again, the one who used to cry when she broke her mother's teacup, the one who once believed in the word sorry. "Dad," she whispered. I wanted to feel free. I didn't think." "You didn't," I interrupted gently. "And that's the problem." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them back before they could fall. "I can't undo it." "No," I said. "You can't." She hesitated at the door. Are you going to forgive me?" I didn't answer right away. The truth was too raw. "I don't know yet." And maybe she knew that silence was worse than anger, because she turned quickly and left, the sound of her car fading into the distance. When the house grew still again, I walked into the study. Opened the drawer. Ran my hand over the empty space. In the reflection of the glass cabinet, I saw my own face, older, harder. My wife's photo stared back at me, that same calm smile, that same unspoken wisdom. "I guess we failed somewhere," I whispered. "Both of us." But even as I said it, another thought took root, quiet but sharp. Maybe failure wasn't the end. Maybe there was still a way to teach her what her mother tried to teach us both. Not through punishment. Through truth. Revenge didn't have to be cruel. Sometimes it could be right. By nightfall I knew what I had to do. I poured out the remaining bourbon, set the glass aside, and reached for the phone. There was someone I hadn't called in years, my old friend and lawyer James. As the dial tone hummed, I looked again at my wife's photo. "Don't worry, Laura," I said softly. "This isn't about anger. It's about memory." And as the phone connected, the first thread of the plan began to take shape. After she left, the silence in the house changed shape. It wasn't empty anymore, it was heavy. Purposeful. The air still carried the scent of her perfume, faint and fleeting, like guilt refusing to fade. The same scent Laura used to wear when she was younger. I used to joke that our daughter was her mirror. Now I wasn't sure if that was a blessing or a curse. I poured myself one last drink, then stopped halfway. My hand trembled slightly, and I realized it wasn't from anger. It was from clarity. That moment, that quiet, trembling, razor-sharp clarity that comes when you finally accept that something's broken and needs to be rebuilt, even if you have to break more things in the process. I put the glass down, untouched, and stared at the family portrait on the wall. Laura, smiling gently, Emily, gap-toothed and radiant, me, pretending I had all the answers. That man was gone. The man who kept waiting for time to fix what he hadn't the courage to face. I whispered, "You died tonight, old man." It wasn't rage. It was an obituary for who I'd been. I turned the photo face down. That small gesture, the sound of the frame against the table, felt like the first move in a new kind of game. I didn't want revenge that burned her life down. I wanted revenge that made her see. That taught her the same truth Laura taught me, that love isn't a resource you spend when it's convenient. It's an inheritance you either honor or lose forever. I sat at my desk, took out a yellow legal pad, and began to write. The plan wasn't grand, not yet. It was a sketch of intent. But intent is where all storms start. At the top of the page I wrote, "Teach her the value of what she sold." Under it I drew 3 lines. 1 memory, what the necklace meant. 2 loss, what it cost to forget. 3 truth, what it takes to remember again. The bourbon called my name, but I didn't touch it. For once my thoughts were clear. I called James, my lawyer. He picked up on the second ring. "Mark? Jesus, it's been years." "Yeah," I said. "I need your help. And your discretion." He paused, instantly serious. "You in trouble?" "No," I said. "But my daughter is. She just doesn't know it yet." We talked for an hour. About old trusts, accounts, and legal wording that could make or unmake a life. About a foundation Laura and I had started years ago, a small one meant to fund scholarships for underprivileged kids. It had sat quiet since Laura's passing, like everything else. By the end of the call, James's voice softened. "You sure this is what you want to do, Mark?" "It's unorthodox." "I'm sure," I said. "She took something sacred because she thought it was just property. So I'll show her the difference between inheritance and entitlement." When I hung up, the plan had form. The next morning, I made a list, call jeweler. Confirm resale trail. Contact appraiser. Move funds from primary account. Draft letter to Emily. It felt like preparing for battle, except my weapon was patience. The next step came from something Laura once told me. We were sitting on the porch during one of her good days, the air thick with Texas heat. She'd said, "If you ever want someone to change, don't tell them. Let life show them." So I wouldn't tell Emily she'd hurt me. I'd show her what it feels like to lose something irreplaceable, not out of cruelty, but out of love that refused to die quietly. I went into the attic, opened the old chest, and found the box of letters Laura had written over the years. Some were to me, some to Emily, birthday notes, encouragements, pieces of wisdom in her neat, looping handwriting. One in particular caught my eye. It was addressed to "My little star," written when Emily turned 16. I unfolded it carefully. One day, you'll have everything money can buy, but remember, the only real treasures are the ones that carry meaning. You can replace diamonds, but you can't replace the people who loved you enough to give them. That was it. The lesson. Right there in Laura's own words. That evening, I wrote a new will. It wasn't real, not legally binding yet, but it was a message. A blueprint for the truth I wanted her to face. I drafted 2 versions, one where Emily inherited everything as it was. Another where her share was given to Laura's scholarship fund. The difference between them was one word: trust. If she proved she understood what that word meant, she'd receive everything. If she didn't, she'd lose it all. It wasn't about money. It was about understanding what legacy meant, that inheritance is not a birthright but a responsibility. I printed the drafts and sealed them in identical envelopes. Then I called James again. I'll need you to deliver one of these to her in a few days. But not yet. He hesitated. You're sure this won't destroy her? No, I said quietly. It'll save her, if she's willing to see it that way. That night I sat in the dark, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. I didn't feel victorious or bitter. Just steady. For years I'd lived in grief's shadow. Laura's death had left me half alive, waiting for something to make sense again. Now I realized, revenge wasn't about evening the scales. It was about restoring balance. I took Laura's letter, the fake will, and the printed receipt from Bayview Jewelers. I placed them all in a wooden box, the same box that once held the necklace. Then I locked it, and wrote a single word across the lid in black ink. Truth. That box would become my instrument of redemption. Emily didn't know it yet, but soon she'd hold it in her hands, and for the first time in her life, she'd have to decide what something truly meant. I leaned back, exhaled, and whispered into the quiet. Laura, this isn't revenge. It's a lesson in love. And for the first time in a long time, I felt her there, not as memory, but as calm. Outside, the wind shifted. The rain started again, soft and rhythmic, like applause from somewhere beyond the world. I didn't like theatrics. My life had been small lights and honest work, not a stage. But if you want someone to see, sometimes you have to arrange the scenes so the truth can't be mistaken for coincidence. The first week was logistics, ugly, necessary things. I called Bayview Jewelers back and asked for every scrap of paper they had on the transaction, the receipt, the resale record, the name of the buyer, the appraisal they'd used. The woman on the phone was apologetic. Once she realized the item had family provenance, she compiled everything and scanned it to me within the hour. The sapphire had moved through a couple of hands already. Someone in the city had bought it as an estate piece, and then a dealer had flipped it. The resale price would not have funded a grand trip, but enough for a week where you forget obligations. Next, James and I met in his office, under the hum of fluorescent lights and the quiet dignity of law books. I explained, step by step, what I intended. He raised an eyebrow when I mentioned the fake will, but he understood the point, not to legally defraud, but to stage a confrontation that would leave no room for evasions. If you're trying to teach her responsibility, he said, make sure the lesson has a chance to be learned. If it feels like a betrayal, she'll shut down. If it feels like an arm around her shoulder, maybe she'll listen. He had the soft voice of a man who'd seen marriages saved and ruined by small phrases. I'll handle the legal bits. I'll prepare the official letterhead, the copy of the trust documents, and be ready to appear surprised, if necessary. We set the pieces in place. James would prepare 2 envelopes on his letterhead, one a formal notification describing a conditional arrangement regarding Laura's estate and the scholarship fund we'd set up, the other a short, blunter note that would be delivered only if Emily refused to engage. Both were dramatic, but James and I agreed on one rule: nothing illegal. The goal was conviction, not coercion. I hired a young appraiser I'd met once through a friend. He was sympathetic and professional. When I explained I needed an account of the necklace's provenance, and an appraisal of its value at the time it was sold, he nodded and promised a careful report. He also agreed to note in his report the sentimental value, not as a number, but as a documented statement of family history, who had owned the piece, where it had been worn, photographs that showed its meaning. That language mattered. Meaning can be a fact if you document it. Then I did something small and strange. I spent a day driving around town gathering tiny witnesses. Laura's old friends, the neighbor who taught Emily to ride a bike, a woman from the church who'd brought casserole after the funeral. I asked them, politely, to write short notes about what Laura's things meant, what the necklace had been to her. Most of them were surprised. Some cried when they wrote. I folded the notes and tucked them into an envelope labeled Remembrances. I wasn't collecting testimony to shame Emily. I was collecting evidence that her mother's life was wider than a single drawer, wider than the two of us. That someone could sell a piece of that life without pause was proof that she'd lost sight of a larger story. At home I staged the study differently. I left drawers slightly open, a book on the desk with Laura's old pen on top, the velvet square where the box had been visible to any casual glance. I didn't make it lurid. I simply arranged the room so that someone with curiosity would notice the empty space and the other elements that made the absence speak. Most important was the box marked Truth I'd sealed the week before. After weeks of thinking, I had assembled inside it the appraisal report, the baby receipt, Laura's letter to Emily when she was 16, the notes from friends, and because symbols matter, a small photograph of Laura wearing the necklace on the porch swing with Emily in her lap. I locked it and left it on the coffee table where it might be seen but not immediately opened. The box was not meant to be punitive. It was meant to be a mirror. By now, I'd learned that people don't react well to being surprised in the middle of ordinary days. So I scheduled the moment. It needed to be inevitability with an invitation. James would contact Emily to tell her there were dealings regarding the estate that needed discussion. He'd sound formal, concerned, and professional. He'd give her two options: come in for a private conversation, or receive a mailed notice outlining potential consequences. I wanted her to choose voice over paper. When James called her, I sat in the kitchen and watched the sunlight move across the floor. Emily answered on the third ring. The conversation was short. I could hear her say, "Is Dad okay?" and, "Can I come tomorrow?" She chose the meeting. The day before she arrived, I rehearsed silence. I wanted to be steady. I read Laura's letters again, letting the cadence of her voice settle into me. In one of them she'd written, "People remember what you teach them by the life you lead, not the lectures you give." I promised myself I'd lead a lesson rather than deliver a sermon. When she returned to the house for that meeting, she brought coffee and a tight smile. She tried to sit on the edge of a chair, buoyed by the confidence of youth that still believed charm could clear guilt. For her, this was an inconvenience. For me, it was everything. James arrived with 2 envelopes in his briefcase and a formal face that suggested he believed in procedure. He asked us to sit and speak plainly. He explained he'd been handling the dormant trust fund and that since Laura's passing, certain conditions had been left unsettled. He spoke of community obligations and a fiduciary duty. He set down the first envelope and told Emily it contained an account of the estate's current standing, including a proposed conditional amendment that would make disbursement contingent upon certain acknowledgments of stewardship. She grew defensive almost immediately. "What are you talking about?" she said. "Mom included me in the will. She loved me." "You can't." Her voice wavered at the end, not because of the law but because she sensed something personal was being played out in legal language. That vulnerability was the hinge. I let James read the appraisal out loud, the market value, the chain of ownership, the baby receipt, the photograph of her mother wearing the necklace. When he described the photograph, his voice softened. He told the room about the notes from Laura's friends. He read my wife's letter about treasures and meaning. He didn't point a finger. He merely presented what was true. Emily's face changed in stages. First the color dropped from it, then the muscles tightened, then her eyes widened, and finally, she looked small. There was a moment, brief, terrible, and beautiful, when she saw the necklace not as currency but as a locus of story. It was as if a curtain had parted and she could see into the life she'd been absent from. She started to speak, to apologize in the way people do when they realize they've been selfish. The sentences were clumsy and full of half-truths. I didn't interrupt. She told us about the trip, about being tired, about wanting to chase a life that felt like it belonged to her. She said she thought she was doing what was best for herself. She said, finally, "I didn't think it would hurt you." Her voice collapsed into that last phrase. She meant it with the bluntness of someone confronting a thing that had finally become real. James folded his hands. "The point isn't punishment," he said quietly. "It's accountability. Mark has proposed a condition that will require you to demonstrate stewardship over the legacy your mother left. If you can show responsibility and remorse, you will not only keep what was intended for you, but you will also become the person your mother hoped you would be." He looked at me, asking silently if I approved. I nodded. Then I did something I had not planned to do. I walked to the coffee table, picked up the wooden box with truth written on the lid, and set it between us. My hands did not shake. I opened it. I watched the color leak from her face as she pulled out the appraisal, the receipts, the letters. She read my wife's handwriting and the notes from people who had loved Laura. She cried, but not theatrically. It was the sound of someone finally being honest with themselves. It would have been easy then, easier than anything, to thunder with righteous fury, to make her kneel to words I could name. Instead, I reached forward and took her hand. It was smaller than I remembered, callous from city life, but there. "You can fix this," I said. "Not by paying us back with money. By becoming the keeper of what's left." She looked at me like someone surfacing from deep water. "How?" she whispered. "Start by telling the truth," I said. "Tell me why you did it, and then tell the people you hurt." The tasks I set were practical and restorative: return what could be returned, make a public apology, not for show but for owning the harm, and spend the next year working with Laura's scholarship fund, not as a box to tick, but to learn stewardship. We would set benchmarks, and James would oversee them. If she complied, the conditional amendment would go dormant, and Laura's intention would stand. If she refused, the scholarship, and much of what would have been her inheritance, would go to the community Laura had cared for, a result that would honor her values and deprive none. It was surgical, not savage. A path to restitution, not a forced penance. Emily nodded, wet-cheeked, the hardest thing in her face softening. She stood abruptly and embraced me, the first time in months she'd not held herself apart with sarcasm or distance. For a long minute, all three of us were there in that hug, a man determined to teach, a daughter determined to learn, and an absent woman whose words still reached us like a map. When she left that day, she didn't go to Bali. She went to the small office of the scholarship fund and signed forms. She called the jeweler and asked, haltingly, what could be done. She wrote apology emails to friends and neighbors who had once loved her mother. It didn't fix everything. It couldn't. But it was the beginning of the work. I had not wanted to humiliate her. I had wanted to restore a broken compass. The trap I set was not to spring with a snap but to open like a window. She could step through or walk away. The choice was hers. That night, alone in the study, I closed the lid of the wooden box and placed it back in the drawer. It was not a trophy. It was a ledger. I felt no triumph, only a careful fatigue that comes from carrying intention into the world. Outside, the wind slid along the trees, and somewhere a child laughed. I poured a glass of water and sat with it until it warmed to room temperature. I thought of Laura's handwriting and the way she used to press her palm to mine when storms rolled in. The lesson I'd staged was risky. It could have wounded rather than healed. But in the end, I believed that a lesson offered with love was still better than a silence that let a child stray forever. In the dark, I whispered, "Forgive me if I'm wrong." Then I added, because hope needs to be named aloud, "But do watch her. She's starting to come back." A month passed before the full weight of the plan settled. I hadn't intended to wait that long, but time has a way of testing intent. It forces you to see if what you built was born of anger or patience. By the second week, I knew it wasn't rage anymore. It was something cleaner, a reckoning shaped into mercy. Emily kept her word, at least on the surface. She sent me short updates, practical, distant. I called Bayview, Dad. They're trying to track the necklace. I started volunteering at the scholarship office. It's different. I'm still sorry. The messages came late at night, always from her phone, always short enough to suggest discomfort. But they came. That mattered. James, true to his quiet brilliance, handled the paperwork with surgical precision. He formalized the conditional trust amendment, filed it in a way that looked entirely plausible, and sent me copies of everything. No one outside the three of us would ever know this wasn't a legal requirement, it was a moral one. By the fourth week, Emily called. Dad, I think I found it. The necklace? Yeah, she said, her voice trembling. The buyer still had it, a woman from San Antonio. She bought it for her daughter's wedding. I told her what it meant, and she said she'd give it back if I covered her cost. I used my savings. For a moment I couldn't speak. That sentence, I used my savings, was the sound of something sacred returning. When she came by that Friday, she was different. No makeup. Hair pulled back. A manila envelope in one hand and a small velvet box in the other. The same box I thought I'd never see again. She opened it slowly. The necklace shimmered under the kitchen light, the sapphire duller now, as if it too had learned something about loss. I didn't think she'd actually let it go, Emily said softly. She told me her daughter cried when she returned it. And she stopped. I cried too. I nodded. Good. She frowned. Good? Because that means you felt what it was worth. We sat at the table. The same table Laura and I had bought when Emily was 5, with the scratch from where she'd once spilled paint and cried, thinking she'd ruined it. I ran my fingers over that old scar and said, This necklace was never about beauty. It was about history. Your mother didn't wear it to be seen, she wore it to remember. Emily nodded, silent. I opened the second drawer of the cabinet and pulled out the truth box, the one she had already seen. But this time, it wasn't about evidence. It was ceremony. I placed the necklace inside and locked it once more. No, I said. It belongs to you. But not as property. As a promise. Her eyes widened. Dad, I'm not giving it back, I said. I'm passing it forward. You broke something, but you also tried to mend it. That's more than most people ever do. She covered her face with her hands and started to cry. Not the polite tears she'd learned to use when words failed, but deep, unguarded sobs that came from the child still inside her. I let her cry. When she finally looked up, I said quietly, You'll keep working at the fund. Not because you owe me, but because it'll remind you every day of what her love looked like, constant, quiet, and not for sale. She nodded through her tears. I will. I promise. It wasn't the end of the plan, though. Not yet. There was still one last act, one final lesson that had to be lived, not spoken. That Sunday, we drove together to the small cemetery on the hill, where Laura rested under an oak that bloomed early every spring. I hadn't been there with Emily since the funeral. She'd avoided it, and I hadn't forced her. Now we stood side by side, the velvet box in her hands. The wind was gentle that morning. The sky clear, washed of anger. She'd forgive you, I said quietly. You know that. Emily shook her head. She shouldn't. I don't deserve it. None of us do, I said. That's why it's called love, not balance. She smiled through her tears, small, trembling, but real. She knelt and placed the necklace at the base of the stone for a moment, just long enough to let it catch the light. Then she picked it back up and put it around her neck. She'd want it worn, she whispered. I nodded. We stayed there a long time, talking about Laura, the recipes she'd botch on purpose so we'd laugh, the songs she'd hum when she didn't remember the words, the stubborn kindness that kept this family from collapsing even after she was gone. Before we left, I reached into my pocket and handed Emily a folded paper, one of the 2 wills James had printed. She hesitated before taking it. "What's this?" "The truth," I said. "The real one." She unfolded it and read. There was no conditional clause, no punishment, no restriction. Everything, every cent, every asset, every right, went to her unconditionally. Her hands trembled. "But I thought—" I smiled. "You thought wrong. The lesson wasn't in the document. It was in what you did after you read the first one." She looked at me for a long time, eyes glistening. "You planned all this?" "Yes," I said. "Because I needed you to see what your mother meant when she said love changes form. Sometimes it changes into something that looks like revenge, but it's just love demanding to be understood." She let out a small, broken laugh. "You're cruel." "I'm thorough," I said. We stood there under that oak tree until the sun dipped low. For the first time in years, the silence between us wasn't heavy. It was gentle, the kind that follows understanding. That evening, she insisted on cooking dinner, pasta with the same cheap sauce Laura used to make. We ate in the kitchen, the window open to the evening air. She talked about the scholarship fund, how she wanted to expand it, how she'd met a girl applying for help who reminded her of herself at 17. When she spoke, I saw something I hadn't in a long time: humility, yes, but also light. Before she left, she paused at the door. "Dad," she said, "I'll bring the necklace back every time I visit. So it stays where it belongs." "It belongs with you," I said. "Just don't forget where it came from." She smiled, soft and certain. "I won't." After she drove away, I sat in Laura's armchair again, the room dim and warm, the air carrying faint traces of lavender. The old photo on the wall, the 3 of us smiling under summer light, looked less like a memory and more like a promise kept. I realized then that revenge, when done right, doesn't end in victory. It ends in peace. Because sometimes justice isn't about what you take back, it's about what you give someone the chance to become. 2 years have passed since that morning under the oak. Time has its own way of softening edges, not erasing them, just rounding the corners until pain can be touched without bleeding. I live quieter now. My days start earlier and slower. The house still creaks in the same places, still smells faintly of lavender when the windows are open. But it doesn't feel haunted anymore. There's a rhythm to it again: coffee in the morning, the same mug Laura gave me with a chip in the handle, walks to the post office, calls from Emily every Sunday evening, without fail. She still wears the necklace. Sometimes I see it glint over video calls, the sapphire catching light when she laughs. She touches it unconsciously when she talks, the way her mother used to. She's not the same girl who sold it. She's the woman her mother hoped she'd become. After that day in the cemetery, she stayed in Austin longer than I expected. Moved back into her old room for a while, helped repaint the kitchen, planted flowers in the front yard. It wasn't about guilt. It was about rebuilding something with her own hands. We fought still, not often, but honestly. That was new. We used to talk like strangers walking on glass. Now we argue like family trying to stay whole. She once told me, "You taught me that love isn't comfort, it's work." I told her she taught me the same thing, only in reverse. Every month she sends me updates about the Laura Callahan Memorial Fund. She expanded it, just like she said she would. There's a photo on my desk, her with 3 scholarship recipients, all first-generation college students. They're smiling like they just got handed the world. She told me one of them, a girl named Rosa, wears a small sapphire pendant Emily gave her. "It's not Mom's," she said, "but it carries her story." That was the moment I knew the lesson had rooted itself deeper than either of us planned. I still visit Laura's grave once a month. Sometimes Emily comes with me, sometimes she goes alone. I don't bring flowers anymore, she never liked cut flowers. Instead, I bring stories. I tell her about the people Emily's helped, the letters from students, the way the fund's office smells like cheap coffee and purpose. There's a bench now under that oak. Emily had it made from reclaimed wood, with a brass plate that reads, "Love doesn't disappear. It just changes form." The first time I saw it, I had to sit down before I could read it twice. It was Laura's line, the one she whispered to me when she was dying, and the one I'd written in my mind 1,000 times since. Sometimes I catch myself wondering what Laura would think if she could see us now, if she'd approve of what I did, the deception, the trap disguised as justice. For a while, that thought haunted me. But lately, I think she'd understand. Because it wasn't vengeance that rebuilt this family. It was truth, wrapped in patience. I still keep the truth box. It's on the shelf in the study, locked, untouched since that day. I thought about opening it once, about looking at those letters and receipts again, but I realized I didn't need to. The lesson isn't in the box anymore. It's out in the world, living in the way we speak, the way we remember, the way Emily now teaches others about value and legacy. Last month she came over with someone new, a quiet man named Daniel. He teaches history. He sat through dinner listening more than speaking, which I appreciated. When I went to wash dishes, I heard them laughing in the living room. The kind of laughter that sounds like home returning. Before they left, she hugged me and whispered, "I named the new scholarship after you." I chuckled. "You should have asked first. Now I'll have to live up to it." She smiled. "You already did." I didn't cry then. I waited until the house was empty again, until the quiet settled back in. Then I sat in the same armchair where this all began, the one Laura used to read in, the one I once used to drink myself numb, and let the years play backward like a film. The night I got that phone call. The rain. The empty drawer. The bourbon I never finished. The man I stopped being. It's strange. I used to think revenge was about taking something back. But now I see it differently. Revenge, when it's honest, is a mirror. It shows the world what it did to you, and it asks you what kind of person you'll be after. I didn't get my wife back. I didn't erase the pain. But I did get my daughter back. And maybe that's as close to resurrection as life ever gets. The other day, I found an old voicemail I didn't know was still saved. It was from Laura, months before she passed. Her voice was soft, teasing. "If you're listening to this, you're probably sitting in that chair, staring at something too long. Don't forget, love isn't about holding on, it's about what you do when you finally let go." I listened to it twice, then saved it again. Not as grief, as gratitude. The next morning, I took a drive out of the city, past the fields just beginning to turn gold with summer. I stopped at the small lake where Laura and I used to go when we wanted quiet. I sat on the hood of the truck, the wind warm, the water still. For the first time in years, I didn't think about the past as something lost. I thought about it as something I was still living, just in a different form. When the sun started to sink, I whispered the words that had carried me through all of this. "Revenge doesn't heal you. But sometimes it teaches you how to." I drove home slow, the sky turning the color of old bourbon. When I reached the house, the porch light was already on. Emily had left it for me. A small, quiet gesture, but enough. I walked inside, set down my keys, and felt the air shift, not empty, not haunted, just peaceful. There on the table was a note from her. "Dad, dinner tomorrow. Bring the old photo album. I want to show Daniel who we were, and who we are." I smiled. Folded the note. Tucked it into my wallet. And as I sat down in the armchair one last time, I realized the story had ended long ago. What remained was the echo of it. And for the first time in a long time, that echo sounded like love. If this story moved you, please support the channel by liking the video, subscribing, and leaving a comment with your thoughts. To continue the journey, click the box on the left for the next story. Thank you for being here.